did you first start to develop the opinion that aid to Africa is harmful?
So it's funny because I don't think there was sort of one epiphany. And I remember while I was writing the book and traveling home and having dinners with many of my African friends, they would roll their eyes and say, please, it's so obvious. I mean, no one's going to buy that book. It's going to be, it's so obvious. And traveling, as I said, spending time with many African friends, it was not a sort of obvious pitch that the sort of disappointments associated with the aid programs and the efforts from the international community to really drive economic growth and reduce poverty, the fact that those programs had failed was not something that people in Africa would find particularly shocking. You can imagine that we're talking about 40, 50 years after independence, where there were lots of promises made around the reduction of poverty and increasing economic growth. And these are very, very important to stress because these are the two key things that aid promised to do. It promised to create economic growth and promised to reduce poverty. And in those two metrics, it clearly has failed. And so when people say, oh, but we're providing aid, we're helping with healthcare, or providing aid and it's helping with education, they're missing the fundamental point that is not the responsibility of the international community. Ultimately, it's the responsibility of governments to deliver that. And it's very important, and I'm sure we'll come to this, it's very important that governments are held to task for the provision of those public goods like education and healthcare and infrastructure and national security, because that is the backbone of democracy. If we as Africans are not able to hold our governments accountable for providing or not providing those goods, then we can't have an accountable or a liberal democracy in the way that you have here in the United States. So in essence, if you spend time, being raised in Africa, as I mentioned to you, through primary school, secondary school, my formative years were in Africa, plus tertiary up to university, but also being sick in an African hospital, which I have experienced, you can't escape the aid, the aid culture, and the difficulties and the problems that it sort of imbues in a society. And I think for me, if I had to pick one point at which I thought, gosh, this is actually, I hadn't realized how stark the problem of aid was when I started working on the trading floors in an investment bank. And I looked around the trading floors, and this was around 2001, 2002, and there were people from all over the world, people from Argentina, from Turkey, from Taiwan, and there were just almost no Africans. And at that time, this is a decade ago now, 20% of the world's population was from Africa. And I couldn't understand, excluding myself, of course, why it was that there weren't more Africans on the trading floors. And I don't believe that people are sort of sitting behind a dark curtain saying we better not hire Africans. But it goes back to the origins. Why were there not enough people that were considered educated enough to be on these trading floors? And of course, Africans have a lot of choices. They can go back home, they can work in the civil service, but it just seemed to me this was a microcosm of a broader problem. And going back to Africa and growing up in Africa, it's pretty clear that many people experience the difficulties and the disappointment around the aid regime on a daily basis. And it's not something that you have a eureka moment about. We live this on a daily basis. The political infrastructure, the corruption, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of education, lack of public goods, lack of investment from government. It's clearly and inextricably linked to the fact that the governments are not accountable, and that is linked to the aid programs. Mm-hmm.